A gute Woche. Der Rebbe soll gesund sein, began the Farbrengen this afternoon, that it is customary to bring out the Chazarah in Meise Bepoyel at every Farbrengen. And regarding our Chazarah, there is really no need to search very hard, because the Chazarah, the lesson which we can derive from this week's Chazarah, is obvious right away at the beginning of the parsha, and from the commentary of Rashi on this pasuk. And as Rashi himself gives out a general ruling regarding his commentary, Ani loi bosi elo pshutei shel mikra, that the only goal in Rashi is, primarily and foremost, to explain the simple meaning of the pasuk. So it is understood that when we see what Rashi brings out is what is relevant to the Hayrois Bepoyel, which we can derive from the inyanim which are discussed in the Seder. On the word Behaaloscha, the beginning of the Seder, Rashi comments that the menorah has to be kindled in such a way shetehei shal heves oila me'eleha, that flame should go on by itself. And the Hayroah, the lesson which we bring out from this in Avodah Bepoyel, says the Rebbe, is very obvious. And that is that when a Yid does anything regarding Torah and mitzvahs, a Yid has to know that this has to be done in such a way that once he has accomplished it, it will illuminate and give light on its own and by itself. Oila me'eleha. And when we're talking about a shalheves, about a flame, naturally this refers to all matters of Torah and mitzvahs. As the pasuk says, Neir mitzvah, v'Torah oir. That mitzvah is called a neir, a candle, and Torah is called oir, lichtigkeit. The same thing regarding neshamas of every Yid. Every neshama has the title Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam, as the pasuk says. And notice how Rashi says the word that the flame should go up by itself. And by this Rashi is bringing to our attention, there could be a stand in Avodas Hashem, how one stands on a permanent basis. And as it is referred to, Amida, he is standing. However, there is another level in Avodas Hashem, not that he is standing permanently, however, he is constantly growing higher and higher. As the pasuk says in this week's Haftarah, V'nasati lacha mehalchim bein ha'im dema'ela. What is the advantage of a person? That a person can always be a mahala, can always keep on going higher and higher. How high a person has reached, he shall never satisfy himself and say that he's already reached the highest pedestal and that is enough for him. It is not so. A Yid always has to be a mehalech, always has to be going. And this is the expression which Rashi is referring to. Shalheves, the flame has to be oila me'eleha. It has to constantly keep on going higher and higher. And this is something, says the Rebbe, which is so simple that even a child can also understand it. Because as a child realizes and appreciates when something grows higher and higher, as it is seen the nature of children, even non-Jewish children, that children usually like to measure how much have they grown in height. And this elevation, this aliyah, is in all 7 candles that were kindled in the menorah, in all the 7 lights. Because Torah corresponds to the number of 7, as the Gemara says, based on the pasuk, Chotzva amudeho shiva, that in this week's Seder, in Pashas Behaaloscha, says the Gemara, that until Vayhi ben Soya ha'orim, it is one sefer. Vayhi ben Soya ha'orim in itself is a separate sefer, and from after Vayhi ben Soya is a third sefer. So we see that sefer Bamidbar is divided into 3 svarim. So this gives us a total of altogether 7 svarim. And from this we even derive a halacha. The halacha is that a parsha is considered a parsha that contains 85 letters, as the parsha of Vayhi ben Soya has. Number of 85 also corresponds to the expression in our Sedre, Peh el Peh adaber boy. The Rebbe says he speaks mouth to him, to Moshe Rabbeinu. As the Rebbe explained it later in the Farbrengen. Talking on this inyan, how Parshas Bamidbar in Parsha is really divided into 3 svarim, and the division is in our Seder and the Seder of Vayhi ben Soya. Says the Rebbe, there is a question which as yet he has not found an answer to it, and he has not seen any explanation in Svarim, that Svarim should pay attention to this. Obviously we know this, that every Chumash has its name, and the name is usually based on the first word of the Chumash, or a very early word in the Chumash. So is Bereishis, the first word. Shmois is the second word in the Chumash. Vayikra again the first. Bamidbar is a word a little bit further. But again, we always see that from the beginning of the Chumash, we derive a name for the Chumash. The same when we're talking about every Sedre, it is also that way. Our Sedre is called Behaaloscha. The Rambam refers to our Sedre, giving it the title Vayedaber of Behaaloscha. If we divide Chumash Bamidbar into 3, so the beginning is called Bamidbar. Then the second part of it is called Vayhi ben Soya, as we find the expression in Chazal. However, the third part of it, we do not find any name which is given to the third part of Chumash Bamidbar. And we cannot say that we should give it the name of the opening words of the third part, which begins with the pasuk, Vayehi ha'om kimis oinenim. That the Yidden were complaining. First of all, Vayehi, we know Chazal tell us, wherever the expression of Vayehi is used, it's only an expression of tzar. Ha'om, Rashi comments here, that the Yidden were not acting accordingly. They were acting, Eino Amel Reshoy. Kimis Oinenim is also not a proper title. Tells us how the Yidden were complaining. It's also something undesirable. Even though the pasuk uses the expression, they acted as misoinenim, they were not mamish misoinenim, because the true will and desire of a Yid is to observe Torah mitzvahs as the Rebbe has told us to. But nonetheless, they were still acting like misoinenim. So it's all undesirable expressions. So, question arises: what would be the proper name for this sefer, the sefer from after Vayhi ben Soya? And the Rebbe, as mentioned, left this question unanswered. Getting back to our Indian, a Yid has to come on to the help of another Yid and to the help of a Kadosh Baruch Hu to be able to fulfill his Avodah, that it should be in a way, as we discussed earlier, shall heves oila ma'eleha, to such an extent that a Yid is given a power that he can take any gashmistic and worldly object and turn it into an object of Kedusha, just like we find by Avraham Avinu. That Avraham Avinu, when he put Eliezer under oath, when he sent him to find the shidduch for his son Yitzchak, he told him, Simno yotcha tachas yirechi, which that had the mitzvah of Mila in it, and therefore it was an object of Kedusha. And as the Rebbe spoke already last week, and mentioned it again this week, the question arises, even in those days, prior to Matan Torah, there were other matters of Kedusha. Primarily Korbanos. When a Yid takes a Beheme Gashmis and donates it for a Korban, the Korban becomes an object of Kedusha. And a Yid is given this power, that all matters he comes into contact with, even worldly matters, that all the machshava dibur ma'asav Yid has to be in such a way that in all of it, it should be noticeable and obvious that it is shal heves oila meila, who accomplishes and gives a Yid a koyach to be able to fulfill this. This is through Aaron HaKohen. Even though the halacha is that adloko ksheira bezor, even not a kohen can also kindle the menorah. However, nonetheless, it is obvious that when Moshe Rabbeinu related to Aaron all the details regarding to kindle the menorah, Aaron did not let somebody else go ahead and do it, and he himself went and did it. And as the Mishnah tells us, what was the Avodah of Aaron? Aaron was Oyeves Abriyos, Umekarvon L'Torah. Aaron extended love to everyone, even a person who was given the title of Briyos, which means the only title he's worthy of is the fact that he was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And aside from that, he has no other advantages and no other pluses within him. And even such Yidden, what did Aaron do? Brought them close to Torah. Umekarvon LeTorah. We continued. This lesson is not only for adults, but even for little children. Children that are even younger than 5 years old. And young child knows that child shall have as a gift. Child shall have a chumash, a siddur, and also a pushka of tzedakah. And when the child puts this pushka in an obvious place, so it's in such a way that the pushka reminds the child from time to time to put in coins of tzedakah. And the same thing that the siddur is placed in an obvious place. The siddur reminds him that it's time to say a bracha, or moidani, or as we see, the special tefillahs that are given to a child, the special birchas hamazon, which is made for children. Berich rachmona elokana, which brings out also our child realizes how the Rebishter rachmona, that means HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and elokana, our God. And even the child from early childhood is being trained, and this is being instilled in him to be able to serve the Rebishter properly, which this is, even though this is not part of davening, but this is also printed in the Siddur. And as we find regarding the Chazal tell us we cannot compare a person who reviews his learning 100 times to the one who reviews his learning 101 times. Because in those days it was common, and the common practice was to review something 100 times. The reason for it was, in order to make sure that it becomes part of him, and it should not be forgotten, there was a need to repeat it that many times so it becomes part of him. Which this is the same concept. It should remain with him, and it should be there, and it should not be forgotten. Just like the Gemara tells us, there's an expression in Chazal, person said, he's thankful to his head that when he comes to Moedim, he bows automatically by himself. Which this is the same idea. And this is the Hayarah, the lesson L'Poel, which we walk away with from this week's Sedra. That every Yid has to emphasize the Behaaloscha. Behaaloscha speaking directly to each and every Yid. Behaaloscha, directly to every Yid. That his Avodah has to be in a format of Shalheves Olam Eleha, meaning that he will uplift all worldly matters, and all worldly matters will become an object of Kedusha. And as we spoke earlier, an oath is done on an object of Kedusha. And what is the goal of an oath? This also accomplishes that a Yid should go yet higher in his avodah, which is what Alter Rebbe brings out right away at the beginning of Tanya, that the neshama is put under oath before the neshama comes down into this world, that it will fulfill the wish of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as it's brought out in Chassidus, not only is shvuah an expression of an oath, shvuah is also meloshen soiva, meloshen filling up. And the pasuk says, "Va'achalta v'savata uve'rachta," that a yid is being filled up and given an excess amount of strength to be able to fulfill his avodah here in this world. And it should be in such a way that we're talking about the entire flame. The flame that is within each every Yid, meaning his machshava, his dibur, his maisa, his thought, his speech and his action, should all be permeated and dedicated with the light of Torah and mitzvahs. Regarding machshava, regarding the thought of a Yid, it always has to be in a position of shivisi Hashem l'negdi summit. As we know that it was customary by Yidden, that on the Amud in Shul where the Chazan stands, they had posted these words, Shivisi Hashem L'negdi Summit, or as they had it, not only did they have Shivisi Hashem L'negdi Summit, but they also had on top of that an abbreviation, Shin Yud Lamet Sof, which also abbreviates Shivisi Hashem L'negdi Summit. This also has a shayches to the Pirkei Avos, which we're going to say this afternoon, as the Rebbe said it, which we said it today after Mincha, which was the second Perek, and there's the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples. The Mishnah tells us the praise on each and every one of them. So the question arises, we're talking about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. He was the Nasi of his generation. And he felt the responsibility to rescue Torah in his generation, as we find that he was the one that requested, Tein li Yavne v'Chachamer. He wanted the center of Torah to be replanted again in Yavne. So how could it be that all he had was 5 Talmidim? He had only 5 disciples. So the Rebbe brings out that it means he had 5 disciples. That means 5 general disciples, which this covers 5 categories amongst Yidden. And this is what the Mishnah says, Hu hayamoyne shvacham. He would tell us their praise. Apparently we're talking about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The whole idea of Mishnah is to teach us halachas. Mishnah does not tell us any stories. So what is a Mishnah here telling us a story about the kind of disciples that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had? Whole idea of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was, he was constantly, throughout his entire life, he was dwelling into Torah. To the extent that before he passed away, that is when he expressed himself. He doesn't know in what way he will be carried. He will be taken. Why? Because throughout his entire lifetime, he had no time to check this out. He was constantly busy learning Torah. And what is the Mishnah telling us? That he had 5 disciples. That means that he had 5 categories of disciples, which these are the 5 general type of disciples which are around, and all of these were included amongst the disciples of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Regarding our Sedra which we read today, Sedra which we read is in Chumash Bamidbar, which prior to Matan Torah we read the Sedra of Bamidbar. That emphasizes the relationship between Midbar and Matan Torah. Just like Midbar is an open place and everyone can have access to it, the same thing, Torah, every Yid, as long as he's a descendant of Yaakov Avinu, as we say, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Meirasha kehilas Yankov. Torah was given as an inheritance to the entire community of Yankov. From that we come to Pashas Nosei. Nosei means Nesias Roish, to uplift the heads of all the Yidden. And afterwards we come to Behaaloscha. This can be read after Matan Torah, because after Pashas Nosei, at times it is read before Matan Torah, at times it is read after Matan Torah. Mostly it's after Matan Torah. However, Behaaloscha is always after Matan Torah. Why? Because this avodah that a Yid should be able to reach to the level of Shalheves Olam Eileh, as we just brought out, that is, whatever he has done is standing completely. He has done it perfect and complete, that it can rise and illuminate on its own. This is something which a Yid can reach to only after Matan Torah. And then we come to Parsha Shlach. Parsha Shlach tells us all about the Meraglim. Rebbe spoke about it a little bit later. And then we have the Haftarah of Parsha Shlach, which this is the desirable Meraglim which was sent through Yeshua, Meraglei Cheresh, which this is the concept of Bittul, which this corresponds to the Nafshi Ka'ofa L'Koil Tiyeh. Which this leads to it, that we will altogether have the Geula. And we will have Geula, we will again have the Menorah, and the Menorah in a way that we will be able to point at it. Here is the Menorah, together with Moshe and Aaron. And the Moshe Rabbeinus of our generation. And as it's known regarding the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the love, the tremendous love which he had to each and every Yid. And he came out with proclamations, Kol Koires. we're notified that all that is left for us to do is to polish our buttons, and then Mashiach will come. And then we already past this stage as well, and our buttons are already shining also. And all that is left now is imdu hachin kulchem. We have to all stand ready for what? To greet Mashiach Tzidkenu. And greet Mashiach Tzidkenu, all of us. As the pasuk says, "B'nareinu biskanenu, b'vanenu b'vnaseinu," we will all be taken to Eretz HaKodesh and to Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. The second Sikha, the Rebbe continued that this Shabbos comes as a continuation to Tesvav Sivim, which we had this week. Tesvav is the day when the moon stands in its completeness. Kaim Basira Bashlemusa. And from the day of Kaim Basira Bashlemusa, we entered into Tes Zayin. Tes Zayin, that is 4 times 4. Then we have Yud Zayin, which is Toiv. And from Yud Zayin, we enter into Yud Ches, which is Chai, which is all of these special days. All these are days that prepare us to Pasha Shlach. And the Pasha Shlach, these are the days before we enter Pasha Shlach, because today to Mincha we began reading Pasha Shlach. And in Pasha Shlach we read about Moshe Rabbeinu sending the Meraglim. The question arises, how can it be? Moshe Rabbeinu was the leader of Eden, and he was definitely well aware of all their natures and all their weaknesses. So how could it be that Moshe Rabbeinu sent the Meraglim, something which caused and led to such aggravation? Especially we know that the Torah is very careful not to tell us anything undesirable. The Chazal say, "Afilu bignus behemot me'al dibarakos." The Torah does not talk anything which can cause shame to a non-kosher behemah. And how is it that here the Torah is elaborating on something which is so undesirable regarding the Meraglim? So therefore we have to say that there's something positive in the Meraglim as well. And as we can see from the Haftorah of Pasha Shlach, because there it discusses regarding we mentioned earlier, regarding the quiet way how Yeshua sent the Meraglim, and that assisted to take over Eretz Yisrael, to capture Eretz Yisrael. So the question arises, we always know that the contents of the Haftorah corresponds to the contents of the Sedra. In the Sedra, we read about how undesirable the Meraglim were. And in the Haftorah we read something so positive about the Meraglim which Yeshua sent. So we must say that the Haftorah is bringing out the pnimius, the essence and the positive sense of the Meraglim which was sent by Moshe. And it comes as a continuation to the Meraglim which was sent by Moshe. Beginning from Yeshua and Kalev. Yeshua, who was the Meshares of Moshe, as well as Kalev, who was a descendant of Shevet Yehuda, so he has a shaychus to Giyula, Gula Amitis Vashlema. And even the rest of the Meraglim, as Chazal tell us, Ba'isa Shok Sheram Hoya, at that time when they were chosen by Moshe Rabbeinu, they were all in perfect shape. And afterwards, even afterwards, there's the expression of Chazal, Ein Lehem Chelik Lo'olam Haba, that they have no part in Olam Haba. So the Rebbe says, I've spoken about it on previous occasions, that it means they do not have a part in Olam Haba because they are at a higher level. They are getting more than that. Which this brings out at the high level which they reached. And from these special days which we are in now, comes also the day of Chav Sivim. Chav Sivim, the Magen Avram writes, and it's quoted in Halacha by the Magen Avram, that Chav Sivim, in the country of Poland, it was a day of fast. Even though, says the Rebbe, that our Rabbeim, though they knew of the Magen Avram, did not feel that way. Even though the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, lived in Poland for a certain amount of years. Regarding Poland, says the Rebbe, that is the name of the country. And this name was given to them by Goyim. Goyim gave it this name. However, there's a message behind these words. When the Yidden first arrived into Poland, they expressed themselves, Poi Lin, which means here we will sleep over in Hebrew. Which meaning that in the time of Golus, when do we sleep? We sleep at night. Night is compared to Golus. Choshech, Golus. But we will spend our time in Golus here in Poland. This is something which the Yidden expressed when the first group of Yidden immigrated into Poland. And as it is known in the history of Poland, that many ministers in Poland, many pritzim in Poland, have entrusted their entire estate that it should be managed by Yidden. And how do they call Yidden? The Yid would usually be called the moshke of the village or of the town and so forth. What does the mean of a moshke? Moshke, this refers to Moshe Rabbeinu. And again, even though they did not realize it when they said it, they did not see what they are saying. Why? Because every Yid is referred to as a Moshe Rabbeinu. Because every Yid has a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu within him. And they entrusted their estates and their businesses that it should all be administered by Yidden. Because they knew very well that had it been administered by Goyim, it would be wasted for undesirable spendings. And when the Yidden administered it and when the Yidden ran it, then it was spent and it was run and it was administered properly. Regarding Poland, says the Rebbe, they need Rabbanim, a Meirei Derech, people that should guide them. And all of this has to be according to Torah. Because when we're talking that the name of Poland is Poilin, here we will sleep over. Sleeping over, when do we sleep at night? The Gemara says, night was created for the learning of Torah. So we see how in the Choshech of Galus, we have to illuminate it with Torah. The Rebbe continued. Spoke earlier about Vahi ben Soya Ha'orin. Vahi ben Soya Ha'orin. Which just has a shaykhs to each and every Yid. As the Pasha Vahi ben Soya contains 85 letters. And this is, the Pasuk says, Pe el Pe Adaber Boy, which just really has a shaykhs to each and every Yid. Because every Yid has a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu within him. So, as we mentioned earlier, that something that has 85 Oisiyas is considered a sefer in Torah. And Mele, each and every Yid is a sefer Torah. And as the Friedrich Rebbe expressed himself, that every Yid, when it comes on Simchas Torah, every Yid is the legs of the sefer Torah. Because a Yid, how does the sefer Torah dance? Through the legs of a Yid. So Simchas Torah is really extended for the entire year. Because as the Ramah writes, Toiv Leiv Mishte Tamid. Especially when we are at the Chassidische Farbrengen, when we're singing Chassidische Negunim. And we know the greatness of the Chassidische Farbrengen. As the expression goes from the Alter Rebbe, that a Chassidische Farbrengen can accomplish more than Malach Machal can accomplish. And we are involving all Yidden within it. And as it's brought out in Chassidus that today, there are no Amaratzim at the level as it was in the time of Shas and the time of Gemara. Because now each and every Yid has his shaykhs to Torah. And the shaykhs to Torah in a way of Shalheves Olam Eileh, as we spoke about earlier. That each and every Yid can reach this level. Reach the level that whatever he accomplishes will be illuminating and constantly growing and flourishing on its own. I also spoke briefly, Mitzvah Shabbos tonight is the Mlava Malka for Koilel Chabad. Koilel Chabad is an institution in Eretz Yisrael which was founded by the Alter Rebbe. And we know there are many letters, holy letters, which are written by the Alter Rebbe, by all the Nesiim, regarding the importance of Koilel Chabad. Through our involvement in Koilel Chabad, we will see to it that the Rebishter will do an act of Koilel, bringing together. The Rebishter will bring together all Yidden. Oida kabetz olav lenikbotzav, as the pasuk says, bring us all together. It should be noted that these letters that the Alter Rebbe writes about Koilel Chabad, about the greatness of giving charity for poor people in Eretz Yisrael, many of these letters are printed in the Igeres HaKodesh, which this is the fourth part of Tanya. And the fourth part of Tanya, this has a special shaykhs to the Geula, which we are so anxiously awaiting for, which this will be the fourth Geula. And then we will have the third Beis HaMikdash. With the Geula HaMitis VaShlema, all of this coming, Tekef Umiyad Mamish. A gute Woche.